This podcast is powered by Pivotal Moments Media. Check out our education, content, and more at pivotalmomentsmedia.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life After the Military, a show completely focused on reversing the trend of veteran suicide, homelessness, and problematic transitions by helping veterans, their spouses, and families transition from military to civilian life and strengthening the mental fitness of our active duty military members, veterans, and their families. Our show is powered by Pivotal Moments Media, an organization on a mission to strengthen mental fitness worldwide for all. Go check them out at pivotalmomentsmedia.com to learn more. My name is Lee Elias, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Howie Cohen. And we are privileged to have United States Army Colonel retired Patty Collins with us today. Patty served in the United States Army for 24 plus years as a Signal Corps officer, providing a wide range of command and control, computers, intelligence, and cyber support throughout her storied career to conventional, airborne, and special operations organizations. Patty's military assignments and accomplishments included, this is my favorite part of every intro, is the list. I always love reading these. Commanded an airborne signal company in the 35th Signal Brigade, served as the operations officer, executive officer, and troop commander in the communications support organization that supported an Army Special Operations Forces organization, 2+ years as the commanding officer of the 57th Expeditionary Battalion, missed that one up, multiple assignments as the division officer for the Joint Staff, 1 year as the International Security Assistance Force Knowledge Manager in Afghanistan for General Stan McChrystal, 2 years providing leadership and management consulting services for a Fortune 50 companies as part of the McChrystal Group. And as amazing as she was with all of the military and work after experience I mentioned above, Patty is also an accomplished and highly competitive triathlete who completed and competed in the 2016 Paralympics in Rio de Janeiro. Today, Patty is the Deputy Director of the U.S. Government Publishing Office. Patty, that was a mouthful, but I love reading them. I really do. It's our pleasure to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Life After the Military.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Lee.
Yeah, no, and again, it's a pleasure to have you. And we start every show with the same question. I'm going to do the same with you. Again, you served for over 24 years in the Army. Can you share with our audience how you prepared and executed your transition? What went well? What didn't go well? What would you do differently if you could do it all over, knowing what you know now?
Yeah. Thank you. That is a great question. Some people know when they're ready to leave the service and some people don't. And I think I did know. And I probably knew about 3 or 4 years before it happened that I had an upcoming move to the DC area. And then I felt like that's where I was ready to transition shortly after that. So I knew that I wanted to take some time off and spend time with family, figure out what I wanted to do. And it also coincided with triathlon becoming a Paralympic sport. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of things that lined up, some coincidentally, some not. I recently bought a house in a neighborhood where I wanted to spend a fair amount of time. So a lot of those things happened at once. One thing I did well, and it sounds silly, and this was while I was still in the service, when I bought that house, I made a point to walk across the street and next door and meet my neighbors and introduce myself. And I had not done that at all during my military career. I never lived on post housing for a variety of reasons. It just never worked out. But it seemed like every other place I knew that it was for a finite amount of time and I didn't put forth the effort. But I remember walking across the street and meeting my first neighbor, which led to meeting more neighbors. And so within about a 6-month period, I probably knew 10 neighbors. And I'm still living in the same house, still have those neighbors, and they're all close friends and family members today. So I've watched, I've watched some of their kids from middle school to now joining the Army. So that to me was important. And as funny as it sounds, because I am in the DC area, at the time, none of those neighbors were military members and very few were federal employees. So it was definitely new for me to meet folks like that. I hadn't been in an environment like that since I was a kid. Right. So I think that I did well because I put down roots and I developed connection quickly outside of the military. And that definitely helped my transition because I didn't ever feel like people around me didn't understand where I was, what I was doing, where I was going. So that I think was a good thing. Unlike many people, I took what I will call the gap year. And it was mostly because I wanted a full year to train and see if I could be competitive and make the team to go to the Paralympics in 2016. So that is not a financially smart decision for a lot of people. I was fortunate in that I did have some money saved up to do it. I did prepare to do it. I was still getting a bit of an income because I was a national level athlete. But I would say to everyone, if you can take some time, even if it's only 30 days, take the time and make a clean break between your service and whatever that next chapter is for you. When I was going through my transition assistance program, there were people in when I remember you couldn't leave the program without having a resume and without applying for 3 jobs. And even though I explained to this person that I had a job and I wasn't planning on applying for jobs for a year, there was no getting around it. So I had and it was a good process. It was good for me to go through the process of writing a legitimate resume, putting forth effort. Full disclosure, the jobs I applied for were like Starbucks barista, bike shop mechanic. They weren't my career at the time. They may be in my next career, who knows? So those were good preparations. I did well. What I didn't do well, and we'll fast forward past the Olympic year, is I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And Howie knows the story because he was instrumental in my first job. It was a great place to land. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. I learned an awful lot about myself, about the private sector. But I don't know if it was the right fit for me at the time. It was right for a lot of reasons, and I have zero regrets about that. But I didn't put a lot of time and effort into what did I want to do. As it turned out, consulting was terrific. Traveling frequently was not something I enjoyed. I left the job just prior to the pandemic, so certainly their business model has changed significantly, as has the rest of the world's. But yeah, I didn't like getting on a plane regularly and flying.
Right. Patty, a few things I noticed just from your answer.
Howie
and I have really started to identify the congruencies between guests of what went well, what didn't go well. What's interesting about what you said, we know that the loss of community, purpose, identity, all of those types of human nature things, that's what leads to extreme problematic transition. Yeah. It's almost like you had the foresight, whether you knew it or not, maybe it was subconscious of, I need a community. Right. So the first thing you did was find that community. You created it yourself in a way by reaching out. So many people don't do that. But I love that you said that. I went out and I met my neighbors. So you immediately created a community. And then purpose, training for the Olympics as a purpose, there's an identity there. So immediately after transitioning, which is never easy, like you kind of checked off in a way, like the 2 of the major boxes that are left behind for us. So for the people listening, well, we're not saying that you have to go introduce yourself to your neighbors or that you need to become an Olympic level athlete, but you have to fill those gaps somehow. The other note that I have here is you said that, you took that year gap and that you said 30 days is usually, that's for any transition in life.
For sure.
Any time. Yeah. I wasn't saying you weren't saying that yet, right? Any transition in life, if you're making a major life change, give yourself some time. We hear all the time about these veterans. Oh, I stopped on a Friday, started my new job on a Monday. No, it's not a good idea. You need the time to let your mind rest and to kind of reset. All of us do. And obviously finances play a major role in that decision. But I just think it's worth the time mentally to figure stuff out, plan for 30 days minimum, minimum,
right.
A year's even better, but minimum. Howie, I don't know if you felt the same way.
Yeah. Well, hey, Lee, listen, if you were to look at my notes right now, you just hit the 2 points that I wrote down. How
Right.
about that? Are we connecting?
You know what I say? Great minds think like Howie. I agree with you, Howie. But first off, thank you for that. But it shows that, we've done so many of these episodes that we really are seeing.
Sure.
We can equate it to that. Wow, you made a community. You've had that purpose, right? And Howie, I agree with you. Yeah, that's cool that we have the exact same notes on this.
Yeah. And listen, just to expand a little bit on what Lee said about the time off, and what Patty did with the time off is we've had a couple of guests who were in a financial position to do that, right? They made a conscious effort. So this is the point I want to make is they made a conscious effort to get themselves at a point where they were debt free prior to getting out of the military. Right now, I realize not every veteran, every transitioning veteran, every family can afford to do that. Many are living month to month, paycheck to paycheck. Right. But what I would offer to you is if you start earlier in your career to really start managing your finances and controlling your spending and get to the point where you keep yourself relatively debt free, that kind of discipline will give you so much more freedom when you get to the point of transitioning, because many of us felt I did not feel this, but many transitioning veterans feel a tremendous amount of financial stress,
Right.
because and so they feel like they have to get a job right away. They feel like I have to take the first job offer they get. In many cases, they learn very quickly that they didn't make a good decision.
Yeah.
So why put yourself in a stressful position like that, when if you are a little bit disciplined while you're on active duty, you save money. Well, first of all, get debt free, and then you actually start putting money away, whether you're investing, whatever, saving it. So it creates a little bit of a financial level of independence that gives you the freedom then to be a little bit more deliberate in your process of transitioning, right? And so we've had a couple of guests that have been able to do that, and I think it's a phenomenal lesson learned to share. And obviously, Patty was in a position to do that as well. So, and another thing I'll share that was told to me and is absolutely true is, one of my mentors, and Patty, you might know him, Ted Hanks. Do you remember Ted?
No.
No. So, well, he was a signal officer like us. So, he was a couple years older than me. So it means he's an old fart. But anyway, Ted was a phenomenal mentor for me going through the process. And he told me, Howie, take time for yourself. He says, I've given this advice to so many people, and the ones who didn't take it regret not taking the time. The ones who did take the time never regretted taking the time. And he says, and you may never get the chance to do it again. So if you can afford to do it, folks, right. And I hope you can, take some time for yourself for all the reasons Patty mentioned. Recharge the battery, clear your head, figure out what you want to do if you don't already know. And look, spend some time with your family. Many of you have probably, especially if you've been deploying, have missed a lot of time with your family. Or maybe you're in a high up tempo unit. Spend some time with your family, and you'll never regret doing that.
If I can, I'll turn it back to you, Patty. I always say, this is my opinion, but I think 6 weeks is actually the perfect minimal amount of time. And here's why. I always say it takes 2 weeks for your brain just to come down from whatever you were doing. Yeah. It's always 2 weeks. It's like almost like clockwork. After 2 weeks, you'll be in a mental state of, okay, that's over. Then it takes 2 weeks to kind of prepare for whatever's next. And that's why I add 2 weeks in the middle, because that's like your vacation. My wife is between jobs right now, former military. And I told her to do that. And it's great because she's coming back from a trip right now. And it's not like she has to go back to work. She can come back and actually relax.
Right.
We underestimate how important that is. And it's how we said, you don't get to do this all the time, right? This is something that happens maybe once in your life, twice in your life as an adult. But yeah, Patty, we talked a lot there. I want to make sure we go back to you.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, one thing about the community is I had my neighbors, of course. Two, I had my training partners who were not all in Alexandria. They all lived all over, but there was pretty regular texts and phone calls, and we go to training camps or we go to races together. That was definitely a connection. And then the other thing, I volunteered for a committee in my town, in my city. And that just opens up your aperture to your world is a little bigger than you think it is. So it didn't have to be my neighborhood, but there were definitely other interests I had, and I had the courage to pursue them and, introduce myself to a stranger across the table.
Right. And the nice part of living in today's technological age is that it's so easy to find a community if you want to find one, digitally or in person. It's never been easier. Right. And again, going back to the financial piece, let's say there's listeners here that are transitioning or transitioned and they don't have the financial peace of mind. Don't underestimate the community and the identity aspects of what we're talking about, right? And if you have that, you mentioned, if you have to take a job as a barista to kind of make ends meet, that's fine. But there's a path here. There's a path to kind of consciousness and peace in your mind that's so important. Obviously, that's what we stand for here. But it's amazing that you had the foresight to do that. I mean that. To kind of fill those gaps of, hey, I need something bigger than myself. You know what I mean? That's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
So let's transition a little bit then. So Patty, you've held several positions since you've retired from the military that, and I'll kind of highlight a few of them. Joint Forces Headquarters Military District of Washington in National Capital Region, You supported them. You mentioned you worked at the McChrystal Group for a couple of years. You worked with Sentinel-6, and now you work with the U.S. Government Publishing Office. So what I would love for you to share with our audience is, why did you choose to work in those different positions? What did you do there? And what have you learned from holding those positions that may benefit folks in our audience?
Sure. So first of all, my job at Fort McNair was my last job in uniform, actually. And strange as it seems, connections I've made there and things that I learned there, I have applied in my current job.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't even know it would be relevant. And I'll kind of come back to that in a minute. So, I mean, you were the first person I met at McChrystal Group, and we sat down. What I loved there was the energy of the young people, really. And, the collaboration of a variety of level of people with just different experiences. And that was a lot of fun. And I think, certainly I enjoyed my time there. I think as a young person out of college going to that place to work, you get a little bit spoiled because you're viewed to be as important, and your opinions and ideas are as relevant as, the old farts like you and I. And I think that was great.
And I'm a lot older than you, Patty.
Yeah, I'm not jumping on that boat with you too.
Yeah.
But you can have it.
So I think that was pretty great. I think there was a lot of latitude for a new employee at that job, which I very much enjoyed. And I enjoyed learning from just a lot of the young, super talented, educated folks there. I didn't know anything about the private sector. So learning about different kinds of business, whether it's consumer product goods or the financial industry or anything like that, was all very interesting to me. I think the common thing with all of it was everyone has the same challenges. And it's really about relationships and leadership. And all of our challenges are similar. And it doesn't matter if you have $1 million and you are 1 million people, or you have $1,000 and you are 10 people. It's generally the same. So there was some security in that, and saying, okay, I understand what your challenge might be. Here are some different examples of where we've had some similar challenges. So that I appreciated. I left there because of the travel, frankly. I took a very short-term job with
you were raising a son, right? I mean, that's probably that, and so it's important. Patty has a wonderful young man at home with her, and a couple dogs, and so look, that was a priority for you, right? Yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, and I don't regret that decision. In the beginning, travel is fun, right? Yeah. You get your upgrade, and now I'm in first class, and now I'm getting warm mixed nuts, and then you're like, you know what, at the end of the day,
right, I can only do that so many times before it's like, this is okay, thanks.
Well, it's interesting because Barry Sanders used to say, I don't know if you've heard him say that, because he had his whole life was basically in consulting, except when he was with Scott's Miracle-Gro. He said, you'll hit that 2-year mark and you'll know, do I want to keep doing this or I'm burnt out? And and he's absolutely right. That 2-year mark, so for those of you who are not familiar with the McChrystal Group, we're talking about leadership and management consulting. So you have to go, and we were dealing with Fortune 500 companies, in many cases Fortune 50 companies, and so you got to go where the client is, right? You can't. Now they're doing it virtually now to a degree, especially through the pandemic. But at that point, you traveled, whether you're on a single person, a 2-person team, a 5-person team. You were traveling week in, week out, for 4 or 5 days out of the week on a client site, and it could be somewhere in the world, certainly somewhere in the United States, and it wears you down after a while. Like you said, it's exciting for a little while, but then it becomes a bit of a grind.
Yeah.
It's not like the movies.
And some people love it, and that's awesome. I mean, it is. Anyhow, so I took a short time with the Sentinel-6, and I was doing business development. And that was also something I didn't love.
Yeah.
Although it was a fully remote job, and my sector was the DC area. So that was
it government contracting, Patty?
What's that?
Government contracting focused? Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic hit about my second month or so in that job. No, maybe a little bit further, maybe 4 months into the job, and everyone's business changed.
Yeah.
And so that became problematic because you couldn't even have a face-to-face with someone who would be a potential client. And so everyone was just sort of reeling. And I was starting to look back at government service, and it was very interesting how it turned out. And I'll say, this is my neighbor knocked on my door, and he is the director of the publishing office. And he said, can you help me with some contingency planning? Because I need to continue to manufacture. We print the daily, the Federal Registry, the Congressional Record. We essentially print 2 newspapers every single day here. We also make passports. We don't personalize, but we do make them, and then we provide them to State Department. And so 75% of the workforce needs to be in the office every day with their hands on equipment doing a job. And so he said, I don't know how I'm going to do this with a pandemic. So we did a little whiteboarding, and this is a neighbor I had known since my time here. And that was sort of the end of it. And about a month or so later, he said, what are you doing with your job? Do you like your job? What are you doing with your job? And I said, well, I'm starting to look at federal options and this and that. And he said, can you send me your resume? And I am a Schedule C, which means I am a direct hire. And so I interviewed for my job 3 times on my front porch with my neighbor, because we were in the middle of a pandemic. And then
What kind of wine were you drinking?
Yeah, that must have been fun.
We were not drinking. They were generally afternoon. And the story is I wound up coming here. And so this has been a really great fit for me, in that it is similar to the military, in that we have a variety of skill sets that work here. We have about 30% white collar workers, and meaning they're fully telework capable, and they have been since the pandemic. And we are really not back, because we have a pretty progressive policy for federal government on there's no reason for you to be here. You don't need to be here. Some people have become remote workers and moved to a lower cost of living, or near aging parents, or just somewhere else where they want to live. And it's been great. I didn't know anything about publishing and printing, but similarly to our earlier themes, I know how to be a chief operating officer. I know how to be a deputy director.
Right.
I have a loose enough understanding of budget and finances and acquisition that I think I'm doing all right. So,
Right. The skills can be learned.
It was a nice landing for me. It is something different every day. I continue to learn, and I'm proud of the work that we do, which I think is really important. I'm proud of the work we do. I'm proud of our employees. We just did a big new strategic plan, and complete with values and mission, vision, values. And I want to.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I took exactly what we learned, and I said, this is a way of doing your strategic alignment, which we adopted. But I want to share our values, because I think it will be unusual for people to say a federal agency has these values: honesty, inclusivity, kindness, and effectiveness. 4, that's it. And hike is the way I remember it. And my boss has 3 rules, and they are: be honest, be kind, and get results. That's all. And every time we have new folks come in, they get the 45-second speech from him is, I'm going to ask you to do 3 things while you're here. That's it. If you can do that, you're probably going to be pretty successful. And it's been a lot of fun.
That's refreshing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's refreshing and familiar, as Howie said. I said we do the same thing.
Familiar, and I just have to laugh, because I say nobody ever changed someone's mind by insulting them or being rude.
Right.
So we can be nice and voice our opinion.
That's funny. That never happens on social media. I don't know. That's what social media is, right? That's all it is, right?
Well, there's a wonderful saying I've learned over the years: a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. You will never, ever, ever change someone's mind if you're not, you know what I mean? You have, and there is no substitute for treating people with dignity and respect.
Sure.
I read this morning, Howie and Patty, that from a very prominent business person in the world right now, he said he grew up in the era where only the strong survive. And he said, I still think that's true, but being strong now is being empathetic, being kind, and understanding other people. It's not burying them into the earth.
100%.
Just a perception change, but you do need to be strong. I thought that was a really great way of putting that for maybe people who don't understand it. It's how you define those words. And
Well, Lee,
I'm glad to hear that a government place is doing that. I mean that.
I just sent a video to your dad this morning. You know, he sent me a Simon Sinek video that was just magnificent about leadership that interestingly enough, I had never heard before. And I've listened to so much Sinek material. And I just happened to come across, funny enough, I just happened to come across another one, but he basically talks about, you know, leaders being empathic. Right. And he says it's absolutely, if you want to be an effective leader, you have to really deeply, sincerely care about your people. Right.
Well, I've had both types of leaders, and the one that you're describing always succeeds more than the one that doesn't nowadays. Right. And again, when I was younger, no one did that, and it wasn't that fun, to be honest with you. But well, my father, Howie, and I, we're going to have a new show soon called Philosophizing, where we just
that's one of my favorite words.
Yeah, I got that straight out of Dodgeball, but we're philosophizing.
Lee's dad is freaking amazing. I had a chance. I've known about him for years. You know, Lee and I have known each other about 3 years or so, and I've heard about him, but I finally got a chance to meet him a couple weeks ago. And I'll tell you, he's a very young 81-year-old man. And he's just got a great way of looking at life right now. And we could all learn so much from him.
I'll tell you this, Patty, I'm blessed to be surrounded by my father, people like Howie, and you. Just bringing this back to you, but I mean that I've always said doing these shows, and I'm really blessed to get to do multiple shows, but you are who you hang out with, right? I always say that. I'm like, I get to hang out with some pretty awesome people.
You are a product of the company you keep.
Right. Yeah. Right. And this is why I love doing these podcasts, because I get to speak to people like you. How are you not going to have a great day when you're speaking to people like Patty? That we're listening.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Patty, so let's get back to you. So, you know, obviously, you know, those of us who know you, we know that you had an unfortunate, you know, biking accident in 2006, and you sustained an injury that left you as a below the knee amputee. So what I would love for you to share with our audience, you talk about overcoming adversity, and that's a challenge I think many people in our society have today, that they do not have the ability to face and overcome adversity. But share with our audience, you know, what happened, how you rehabilitated yourself both physically and mentally, because I imagine that had to be a challenge for you. And how and it's crazy how life works this way. And I'm sure you didn't see it that way at the time, but look at what you've accomplished because of that. So, you know, just talk about how you recovered in your both your military and post-military career, and then what motivated you to compete in the 2016 Paralympics.
Those are a lot of questions, but thank you. This is a topic that I'm very familiar. I had just come home from Iraq. I was on a promotion list early, which was completely unexpected. So I will say that I was at a time in my life where I was not shy.
Now, this was to major or lieutenant colonel?
Lieutenant colonel.
Cool.
Not shy on self-confidence. I will fast forward a little bit and say losing my leg and the journey I went through was the best thing that ever happened to me.
It's crazy,
I couldn't say that at year 1 or 2, but it's been 15 years.
It's amazing to hear you say that at any point, honestly. Yeah. I think that's actually really,
for sure.
Yeah, inspirational. Go ahead.
Thank you. And so, hit by a car riding my bicycle to work. I was about a mile from my office. And the driver simply didn't see me. He didn't have a cell phone. He wasn't listening to the radio. And I don't think initially I didn't believe that it was as bad as it was. I was like, oh, it's just a broken ankle. I said to my surgeon, I have a triathlon in 4 weeks. I was intent on doing it.
Wow.
And I went into surgery pretty quickly, and he said afterward, this is the worst ankle break I have ever seen.
Oh my God.
You have no cartilage left in your ankle because you were hit at such a high rate of speed and there was such force. And he said, in 6 months, you are going to beg me to fuse your ankle because you're going to be in pain trying to walk. And still under the influence of narcotics, I said, you will cut my leg off before I let you fuse my ankle. And I didn't even really know what I was saying at the time. I didn't know anything about ankle fusions. However, that is exactly what happened. At about the 12-week mark, I got my external fixator off and the bones were starting to heal, and I was slowly starting to walk with crutches and a boot. But I now know that chronic pain can certainly affect you emotionally and mentally.
Absolutely.
And as a kid that grew up with sports my whole life, I'm having a bad day, what am I going to do, was go for a run, go play outside, go do something to get your heart rate pumping. But I didn't have that. And the most painful experience of all of this was not the physical pain, it was depression, because I didn't know what it was. And I was in disbelief that it could happen to someone like me. And I feel extremely fortunate. First of all, I'm going to just outline like my signs and symptoms in case anyone listening is experiencing this. Just despondent. No, the happy person was not there. I couldn't watch a 30-minute sitcom and have it keep my attention because I was really obsessing over my plight, of how is this going to heal? How am I going to stay in my career in the military? I was married at the time. We were in the process of adopting our son, and it was just so many unknowns and uncertainties. And I certainly catastrophized everything because your mind is so much stronger than your body. And my mind was having none of that, right? I couldn't see the forest through the trees. It was sad. And I was not suicidal, but I remember saying, I want to go to sleep and wake up when this is over. I want to fast forward to whatever that over is, but I couldn't sleep at all. So I was a wreck. I lost a fair amount of weight from just worry and just having no motivation. And I confided in a coworker and my operations sergeant major, and he said, we have tons of mental health providers here. And if you think you're the first person to sit on a couch and cry your eyes out with a box of Kleenex, you're kidding yourself, because lots of people come through there. So let me just walk you right down to the clinic right now. And he did.
Wow.
And it took a couple of months of doing exactly what he said. Like I spent some time taking some antidepressants. I cried, I got angry. I think the other thing, I never got angry at the driver because I just thought it wasn't intentional. So there's no need of me wasting my emotions on anger. But
that's big though. That's
I
big
had to
on
get
you.
angry.
Yeah.
And then, the cloudiness started to clear. And at the time I was also working in an organization where there were 2 or 3 amputees that were doing really well. And I told my doctor I would prefer an amputation. And he said, a good amputation might be right for you, but I don't think you meet all the criteria to have one. You have bone loss, but not enough. You have nerve damage, not enough, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, it was the offer of the fusion. And I said, well, will an ankle fusion give me for mobility? I was 36 at the time. And he said, golf and gardening. And I said, I don't like those activities now.
Right.
And so his comment was, you don't meet the criteria of you can complete your activities of daily living. And my response was, if I were a 65-year-old woman, but I am not. I'm an active person in the military and wants my career. So my organization said, we'll get you a second opinion. And I met with an orthopedic surgeon from West Point. And we had a long discussion, and he looked at all my films and he said, okay, I will amputate your leg. And I'm fast forwarding a little bit. And at first I said, why are you saying yes when other doctors have said no? And he said, because I understand what's between your ears, and that's more important than an X-ray under a light or an MRI. And so his name is Dr. Kurt Alitz. I will mention his name any opportunity I get. And I went back to work and I Googled his name and I was like, I need to learn more about this doctor. And as it turns out, Kurt Alitz was on the 1980 Olympic boycotted track team.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it was, it wasn't it just very, on one hand, the organization I was working in, I thought, gosh, I never want to get hurt there because every person is vital to do their job. And I didn't want to be the broken person. Right. Yet I would have never seen Kurt Alitz if I wasn't in that organization. And
yeah, Patty, this is still a brag. You're still a brag at this point, right? Yeah.
Yep. And so this was as the Walter Reed kind of scandal of care was breaking in 2006, 2007. And so I was supposed to have my surgery at the Army Hospital at Fort Bragg, and the chief of orthopedics said, you are not having that surgery at my hospital. And so Dr. Rowlett said, fly up to New York and we'll do your surgery at West Point in that small little 400 bed hospital. And I did.
Wow.
And I think I had my surgery on a Wednesday. I flew home through Newark Airport on Friday on crutches. I would
Holy
not get in a
cow.
wheelchair. I was too proud. And
you're by yourself, Patty?
no, I had a medical provider with me, and
Okay.
and my husband at the time was with me, but I was adamant, and they were both
Wow.
frustrated with me for not getting in a wheelchair. And I was like, nope, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Which is probably part of my credit, but also part of the, I have a hard head. And I think after I had made that decision and gone through with it, I never looked back. I have never had one day of regret of, I wish I didn't do this.
Wow.
And I was also surrounded by a group of people that had the approach of, Patty, what do you want to do? Not, these are the things you can't do. And so
Wow.
losing your leg when it's done surgically is not a terribly painful procedure. And so I went back to work before I even had a prosthetic.
Not painful physically.
No, and it was, I mean, by that point for me, I was emotionally in a very good place, and
Cool.
I wasn't, every day there was a new change and a new development and a new healing. And I knew that once my
Yeah.
stitches came out, I could swim. And I knew that once my scar healed, I could get a prosthesis.
Yeah.
And
It kind of gave you almost a light at the end of the tunnel type.
it was a new
situation.
chapter. Yeah.
Right,
Like, okay, I'm
yeah.
opening a new chapter.
Wow. Wow. That's where that hard-headedness plays off too. Like, you know what I mean? You didn't, woe is me with that. You took it as a challenge.
Yeah. And I realized it was 15 years ago, so I probably am blocking out some of the harder times. Like, there were certainly times a prosthesis is not comfortable the day you put it on. Like, there's a transition of getting accustomed to it. And again, I was so fortunate in that the person that made my legs was actually working in the same organization as me. He had lost his leg in Somalia. He finished his career anyway, went to school to become a prosthetist, did it for a few years. And then came back and was teaching advanced skills in our military unit. And so he had the skill set to make a prosthesis. He just wasn't doing it as a full-time job. And so he made my legs. I remember exactly where I was when I took my first steps at work. And he said, I said, how long do I wear this? And he said, wear it until you can't stand it. Take it off, look for skin breakdown or red spots, and then put it back on. And so within 2 weeks, I was wearing it 18 hours a day. And he made my first running leg. I think I got my first running leg in 5 months.
Wow.
And I
No
ran,
kidding.
I was running, in the building where I worked. And so I had a really close community of coworkers that wanted to see me successful because they all saw me prior to all of it.
Right.
That in and of itself, because and we're kind of dancing around this a little bit, but that in and of itself is fascinating to me because I know that environment very well. And you were not an operator; you were a support
person. Yeah.
And I'll just be very candid. When you're in organizations like that, if you're not an operator, you're lower than whale shit. No, it's just the way they are, right? But I find it fascinating that you had that kind of depth of support, which speaks to you as a person, Patty. It really does, because not only just the injury that you sustained, but the quality of person you are. Because I will tell you, folks, I know I know this organization extremely well, and the fact that she got that kind of support is just fascinating to me. I hope I'm getting it. Brad Davis, right? Isn't that
Brad Halling?
No. Who we interviewed a few weeks back.
Brad Thomas. Yeah.
Brad Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
We had Brad on a couple weeks ago.
He's
right.
fantastic.
I was just curious if you knew him. What a fascinating guy.
Yep.
But I think that is so cool, Patty, that you got the support you did.
Yeah. And Howie, I think their culture changed over time because we were all deploying frequently.
Yeah.
And, people ask me about working in those communities, and they always ask me about sexism. And I said, do you know what? I think there is less in organizations like that, because at the end of the day, everyone is important. Right. And as long as their phones and computers worked, nobody cared that I had a ponytail. They just didn't.
Right. Right.
And so, but going back to the community, I think I certainly had the opportunity. Patty, do you want to go to a warrior transition unit and rehab and focus nothing just on that? And I said, no, I don't, because
Right.
it was important for me. I was still working. I was
Well, it's
able
part
to
of your
contribute.
identity, right?
Yeah.
It was part, you don't want to give up that part of your identity. And that's so important too.
I still wanted to be able to contribute in some way. And I was fortunate in that physical therapy was in the same building. There was a swimming pool in the same building. There was a gym, right? And so I know that that's not logistically possible for everyone, but yes, it was part of my identity. And yes, because I had coworkers that had become friends that had been with me the whole time.
Yeah.
They were part of my motivation, because even if you just get a little like fist pump when you're going through the dining
That's
hall,
huge.
like, hey,
Huge.
you know, doing well in your plastic leg because your first leg is plastic. That was very motivating to me.
Well, listen, man, you're around Olympic athletes just carrying guns, right? I mean,
You know, I just when I was in the Montana trip that you and I just talked about, I was with two psychologists that run an organization called Mindful Athlete. And I talked a little bit about it, and I said they are a professional sports team.
absolutely.
This is what their
Right.
sport is, but they've got physical therapy and nutrition and psychology and everything to.
Well, especially now with POTFF, right? With the
That started
preservation
about
of the
the year
force and
after I
family.
left.
Yeah. I mean, that it was all designed to bring all that kind of wholeness into that community,
Yeah.
because what we ask those men and women to do and their families to do,
Right.
they need to be handled differently because we ask so much of them,
Yeah.
you know?
You know, I have a few notes here. Patty, one thing I wanted to say is that, and I'm giving this example for a reason. And I want to preface this with that what I'm about to say with my own experience does not come close to what you experienced. Okay. But I'll tell you why I think it's important to note. I have met active duty and veterans with an incredible range of pain and injury up and down the chart. And I'm going to tell this story because this woke me up, because when we hear examples of, hey, I had my leg amputated, or in combat, this happened to me, my brain typically went to, that's very extreme and it's amazing what you've accomplished. But I'll tell you what, I had a very minor shoulder injury that I dealt with for 2 years. And this is why I'm bringing this up, Howie. I find this, this was a real awakening moment for me. And I kind of dealt with this pain for 2 years before I went to physical therapy and I saw a doctor, and it's torn. I need surgery. It's a minor injury compared to what you talked about. When I went to physical therapy and they kind of worked on it and they put ice on it the first time, and I felt no pain there for the first time in 2 years.
Yeah.
I was shocked at the amount of stress that came off. And this is an extremely minor thing.
That's right. It's not minor, but
compared to what you went through is what I'm trying to say. But my point is, I was shocked that I was like, wow, I didn't realize I was carrying that much fogginess with me.
Sure.
And you know what? My mind worked better after this. I had a way better temper around my children. Not that I'm ill-tempered, but I was.
Well, shit, Lee, we need to get more ice on your shoulder then, man. You know?
Well, I thought you're my ice, Howie. That's what I always say.
I think, Lee, to your point, one of the things I learned through this process was to never compare myself to anyone else, and never, like, because you said you were kind of minimizing your shoulder injury, and I wouldn't, because it doesn't matter. It was something that was uncomfortable enough that it affected you emotionally,
It really
and
did.
it limited what you loved and what you wanted to do, which also wears on us emotionally. And so
Absolutely.
on one hand, you can almost kind of fast forward as we age and we wake up in the morning and think our body's just not cooperating the way we want it to, right?
Right.
Like, okay, well, we've already sort of dealt with that. We know, like, mentally what that
Right.
is. So, but not comparing ourselves to others. I remember part of my my trip down crazy lane, as I call it, was I would see someone who had lost their vision or who had a brain injury and was,
Right.
or was in a wheelchair. And I would say, I shouldn't feel so badly because look at this person.
Right.
But that's not helpful for anyone.
No, you're
So
right.
it's
You're
okay
right.
to feel what you feel.
Yeah.
Just know that there's a mourning process of how
Well, I'll
long.
tell you this, you're actually saying the point I was trying to make even better than I was going
Sure.
to, which is honestly, no matter where you are on the spectrum, like you can't underestimate what this is taking out of you. And like I said, I had chronic back and shoulder issues. They fixed it. And I remember thinking, like, first off, why did I wait so long to do this?
Right.
That's a message, I think, for especially veterans. Like, if you're in pain, you know, and I go, like, I've heard the stories about people go to the VA and they just throw pills at you, and that can be very dangerous too. But if you can find a good doctor or a good physical therapist that can help you, my mood improved. I mean, dramatically. To the point I'm a pretty positive person. I didn't realize how much this was affecting me until it happened. So I just wanted to kind of make that point for anybody listening, that if you're dealing with chronic pain and there is an avenue to assist you with that doesn't deal with only pills, right? But, and there's nothing wrong with that either at times too. Don't try and tough that out. Again, I was amazed, and I'm a civilian saying that, right? You know,
Sure.
So the other note I have here, this is a compliment to the military. All right. And I've said this, my wife served, I was the lowest rank in the military, male military spouse, but I was there. And I always refer to the military as the greatest team on the planet. Right. And what you said something before about sexism and, you know, how you didn't really feel that.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me. Racism, sexism, disabled, able-bodied, those stigmas will always exist. That we're human beings. But what's amazing to me about the military, and even in that environment, when you're given a clear purpose, a clear mission, you know, and you're in a position where you get to work together, it lessens the ability for those things to take hold.
Sure.
And when I think about, again, not to make this broad, but the country, you know, I don't think people have a vision of where we're going. You know, I think we're losing a lot of that. And you're seeing a lot of these bubble up to the surface of racism, sexism, and I'm not saying they're illegitimate in any way, but if we can't figure out a way to work together, you know, it's not going to get any better. And I just think the military, you know, specifically the U.S. military, but other militaries too, just champion that of this is the pathway forward as a team. It just made me think of that, and I wanted to mention it. Again, it doesn't mean sexism doesn't exist. It doesn't mean racism. They very much do, but you want to conquer those things or combat those things, you have to build environments where people have to work together and can have conversations. Or how, as you said, they surrounded you, Patty. They surrounded you because they could see you needed to be there, surrounded.
Yeah.
That says a lot about you. It also says a lot about the military, I think, in my opinion, from an outside.
No, I agree. And I think, you know, expounding a little bit on your point of like, yes, sexism, racism, it does exist.
Right.
I think when the purpose is greater than all of us, and the realization that we have so much more in common that unites us than divides us.
Right.
And then the other thing you said is we can have hard conversations about what you said offended me, and here is why.
Right.
And
Right.
and I could say how insensitive of me. I didn't realize that, and I apologize for that. But like let's care about one another enough to have some hard conversations.
Absolutely. Look, I've always said this too. There's a huge difference between being a racist and a misogynist and just being ignorant. They're two very different things. Like I know a lot of people that say racist comments, but they don't even realize they're doing it to a point, right? And you have a conversation with them and it completely changes it. Same thing with sexism. I mean, you know, men have a hard time putting themselves in the position of a woman, right? And understanding you're not going to ever understand what it is to be a woman, and that's okay. But anyway, I'm not trying to dive down that. I just wanted to say that you know, you were surrounded by people that supported you. I always like to put a highlight on things like that because it's incredibly important, right? And again, I think that the military really does champion that in a lot of ways. Howie, did you have anything before I get to the book?
Yeah. So I actually think this was a phenomenal example of bringing out a couple things about transition. That I just want to bring the audience, bring these points to the audience. So I'm a firm believer, and I think I've got a lot of support with this because it's not just me. I've actually learned it. I've been operating in this space for about 19 months now. But one of the things that's clear to me that if you want to have a successful transition, you've got to own your transition, right? So I want to go to Patty's situation though, right? So she is in a very challenging situation, you know, with her leg and trying to make a decision. And you know what? She took ownership of what she was facing, and she made a decision and she followed through. And this is just one of many reasons why she is as successful in everything she's done in her life, is because she owns the situation, right, takes accountability for it, and then puts the work in, right? Because now she makes a decision, okay, amputate the leg. Well, now you've got to recover from that, right? Well, just like when you're transitioning, you got to own your transition, but then you can't expect anybody to do the work for you.
Right.
You've got to put the work in. And she did that, right? And that's why she recovered from that catastrophic injury the way she did. That's why she overcame the adversity that she faced, both mentally and physically, right? And it's so appropriate that when you apply it to the transition process, right, own the transition, and you've got to be willing to put the work in. Now, it doesn't mean that other people aren't there to help you.
Right.
And people were there to help Patty, right? Just like people are there to help you with your transition.
Right.
There's veteran service organizations that operate the right way. There's people who will be mentors to you that'll operate. So you got to be willing to ask for and accept help. And you did that as well.
No one
right?
does.
You had an unbelievable community around you of high performing combat men who were willing to help you in any way they could, and you were willing to receive that help and accept that help. You still owned the process and you still put the work in, but you were gracious enough to recognize I can't do this all by myself. Well, guess what? Transition is exactly the same way.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
Exactly the
Howie.
same way.
Yeah. One thing I did want to touch on also is we always talk about post-traumatic stress, but we never talk about post-traumatic growth.
That's great.
Which is predictable. There's about 30% of people that suffer some sort of trauma, and that trauma could be a variety of things. 30% will come out a little bit more resilient. I put myself in the more resilient category.
Absolutely.
And the predictors really are, do you have a strong network around you? Are you physically active? Strangely enough, that's a factor. Do you believe that you are part of something bigger than yourself? So are you purpose-driven in your organization? That's kind of it.
Right.
Those are the big three. And Howie, you just illuminated that I did have a network. I mean, I was physically active and I wanted to contribute to being something bigger than me.
Right.
Whether it was my
I'll tell you,
or the Army. Yeah.
That is so powerful what you just said, because there's a couple of things, and again, we don't necessarily need to get into politics or what's going on in society today, but I will tell you, I'm going to get a little on my soapbox here, but the thing that drives me absolutely nuts today is the failure for so many people to take accountability for themselves, their decisions and their actions, right? And the inability and unwillingness to face and overcome adversity. And call it resilience, but you have just illuminated that for anybody who's listened to this. You've done that in multiple times throughout your military career and your post-military career, and what an incredible example I think you are for so many of us, right? Because we need that today in our society. We really do, Pat.
Desperately,
right? We need people who are willing to face and overcome adversity and show the way for the rest of us, because we have a failing right now in this country. And part of it is because parents are shielding their kids from facing tough, challenging situations. So that when the parents are no longer there, they don't know what the fuck to do when they face the adversity. They fail. There are so many examples. This is unbelievable to me that we have people, and you would think the underserved population, right? It's not. It's actually the people from the more wealthy populations who have always, whose parents have always, parted the Red Sea for them to make everything work perfectly. They achieve a 4.0 or higher average, grade point average, right? Great in sports. Right, some captains of their athletic team or the captain of the cheerleader team. Then they go off to college, right, and their parents are no longer there to part the Red Sea for them, and they start facing a little adversity. They get a C on a test and have no ability to handle that. And do you know how many of them commit suicide? The statistics are staggering, because we are protecting our kids. Many parents today are protecting their kids from facing any form of adversity.
and prioritizing the wrong things.
And and when they face it, it's somebody else's fault. It's not their fault or their kid's fault. It's the teacher's fault. It's the school administration's fault. It's whoever's fault, but it's not their fault, right? So I just love this. And Patty, it's funny. As long as I've known you, we've never had the depth of the conversation we just had. I mean, I love you, man.
I love you too.
What you just shared is just so freaking powerful for anybody at any age to listen to. But I hope our younger generations of military listen to, because what a shining example of how to face and overcome adversity and be resilient in the face of so many challenging situations. I think it's awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you.
And Patty, I'll tell you this too. You know, one of the things you said at the end there is I want to be part of something bigger than myself.
Absolutely.
Right? And, you know, Howie and I are always compiling a list of like, you know, what are those top 10 things that everybody needs? And really, to me, the belief in something bigger than yourself, than yearning for that, that's faith. And I always say faith takes many forms. I mean, the traditional form, people look at it as religion, but I said, you got to look beyond religion. Like religion is the belief in something bigger than yourself too. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's how you find faith, but you have to have some form of faith, even if it's just that the universe is gigantic and that we're a small part of that.
Right.
Faith is incredibly important. Right. And the other thing I was going to say too, is that you're a shining example of so many people that are dealing with depression, and have suicidal thoughts feel that they are alone. I mean, that's the overarching, like I'm alone, and our testament to those people. You are not alone. You might feel like you are alone, but you're not alone. And I know it must be very hard to ask for help and stuff, but no, you're not alone. You know, you just have to, someone will find you. There's other people.
And look, and for those of you who see people suffering from that, right? Don't assume, help them, ask them, reach out to them. Right? Because all they need is someone, they need to know that someone cares.
Absolutely.
Right?
It goes so far.
So how many times have we, I don't know what to do. I'm not sure if that's a problem for him or her. Right. Well, you know what? If you think it's a problem, it may be a problem. And if it's not, then you have the hard conversation and you deal with it and then you move on.
But
if you do have that conversation and they really need the help and want the help, and maybe they're not willing to ask for help, but they really want help, then you may have just saved a life.
Yeah.
You know, I can't tell you how many times I look at and read about these suicides, and the first question that comes to me is, who saw something, who saw a red flag and didn't freaking do anything about it? You know?
Yeah.
Because they were afraid to, because they didn't know what to. Hey, you know what? Just talk to them. Just ask them. Just show them you care.
Yeah.
Have a conversation, because that's really what they need the most, is just know that someone else cares and is willing to help them, you know?
So Patty, I'm going to fast forward to the end of the show here a little bit, but before we do, I always give our guests book titles. So every single episode, I give our guests book titles. If you're going to write a book, I come up with titles for you. All right. And I've got 3 for you. I've got 3 for you here.
That's very excited for these. I will never write a book, but now I have some time.
It's okay. We'll write it for you and take the royalties. That's how.
And you can publish it if the U.S. government publishes it.
Yeah, see that? Yeah, you can put that out. So the first one I have is, you actually said this late in the episode, but I thought it was brilliant. Is PTG, post traumatic growth. That was brilliant.
That.
Yeah,
it's really a thing. I didn't make it up. It is really. Oh,
that's
I never heard it before.
Yeah,
and wonderful.
And I love that there's a glass half kind of full version of that, because we don't.
Full,
yeah,
sure.
That's a yin yang. Totally. I always look for balance. The next one is kind of the shock title. This is the one that you get the New York Times bestseller just because of the title. And Howie, actually, you came up with it. It's Olympic athletes that carry guns. You'd have to pick that.
I don't know how that would be received.
Exactly. Well, that's how you get a top-selling book nowadays. You just have to be like, what? You have to pick it up and look at. You know, the subtitle is key on that one, by the way. And then the other one I had was brigade, battalions, baristas, and bikes.
Oh, that might be a keeper.
Right. And we got to get the subtitle, you know, and the subtitle would be, you know, how I did X, Y, Z. But I had 3 for you, but I'll be honest, just joking aside, PTG, post-traumatic growth. That's something I'm going to definitely look into. That was
No
a powerful
kidding.
statement. I love that. And we don't talk about that enough because it's
We
there.
don't talk about it enough. And
Yeah.
I could probably name 10 people that should be on your show that are pillar examples of post-traumatic growth.
Well, I'm sure Howie will be reaching out for those
Absolutely.
contacts. All
Absolutely.
right. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of shorten this question, but
Mhm.
look, our parent company, Pivotal Moments Media, we're all about mental fitness and mental growth. And as we've talked about in this episode, and you've divulged into it a little bit, we go up and down with that all the time. So I want to focus this a little more specifically. I want to know how you practice your mental fitness from an Olympic level. All right. Because again, I run the sports side of our parent company, Grit. And I am always amazed by the human spirit. And this is a fact to me. We just do not know our potential, because every time we think we do, we find another level, right? So as an Olympic athlete, how do you maintain mental fitness, especially on the days when you don't want to do something, right? It's easy when you wake up and the sun's up and you're like, let's go, it's like
Right.
ET or something like that. I'm talking about days it's maybe raining, it's cold, and you're in pain. How do you compartmentalize that and put that into your daily routine?
Yeah. Right before we started the show, Howie and I were talking about, I just took this trip to Montana, and 2 people on this hiking trip with me, and it was done by a consulting firm. We're from an organization in Philadelphia called Mindful Athlete.
Mhm.
Look them up. It's
Yeah, writing it
Dr.
down.
Hunter Stevens and Lee Piccirillo. And since my foray into my own mental health challenges, I've been much more intrigued about the power of the mind and the power of thought, and visualization. And then when I got into elite athletics, practicing mindfulness, which I fully admit I don't do as frequently as I should. It probably should be part of my daily, it should be part of my daily practice. And that's not even focusing on your event or your workout, although those are certainly things. It's really giving yourself time to be still and think.
Right.
I am a bike commuter, and I realize, as outgoing as I appear to be, I need quiet, reflective time. And those commuting times for me that's a little bit of a it's a physical recharge, right? But it's a mental recharge to just be quiet and reflective about life. I am a spiritual person. I mean, I am a Christian, but all of those things are important to me. And when I am slacking on workouts or feeling great, it comes down to, have you taken time for yourself to be reflective? I call it like the dog food diet. Are you getting exercise every day? Are you getting reasonable food every day? And are you getting a nap every day? Right. That's sort of that's my success. But yeah, the mental part of that is way bigger than any of us give ourselves credit for. And I think we spend an awful lot of time being busy,
Right.
But being busy doesn't mean we're being productive.
Right. That's a great answer. And I love how, vulnerable you're with that answer. Like, hey, I'm working on it all the time. And
Sure.
I hear people say what you said before about, this is my time, and I kind of protect that bike ride. That's your time to you. And again, the other side of it too is the awareness of that is my time.
That you
right?
need it. Yeah.
Right. A lot of people that's going to the gym and they don't realize, wow, that you're really kind of mentally conditioning yourself too.
Yep.
Right. And that consciousness of that my mind is an organ or a muscle or however you want to look at it, and that you need to train that as well, is so important. And again, all successful people, in my opinion, it depends how you define success, but they have some workout for their mind.
Yeah.
It's never just all the time and being restless and busy. Like you said, that's not fulfilling. Right. So thank you for sharing that with us.
You bet.
All right. Howie, any closing remarks before I?
No, listen, Patty, I just feel, I just wish, I've been wanting to have you on this podcast for, ever since we decided we were going to do it. And, just me screwing up scheduling and whatever, but thankfully it finally happened. And this was even more than I ever could have asked for. And I love you to death, man. You have always been an inspiration to me and so many others. And by the way, Becky Margiotta says hi. So,
another person who should be on your show. Yeah.
She was.
Yeah,
she was one of our first guests, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were on my original guest list, and I just couldn't get the scheduling work out. But
Totally
listen,
fine.
it finally happened. And but thank you for sharing your story with us. What an incredible model and example you set for all of us. And I just thank you for everything you've done, everything you do, how you take, and listen, this is a caring, highly effective leader right here. I've been around Patty most of my, in some form or fashion. We never actually worked together until we worked at McChrystal Group, but I've known of Patty almost all my, more senior time in the military. Incredibly well thought of, has worked all the tough jobs that a signal officer could possibly work, and has excelled in every one of them, and is so highly thought of in the airborne and special ops community. So thank you for taking time for us, with us, Patty. You're awesome, man.
Thanks for giving me the time.
Cool.
It was a pleasure. Wonderful episode. And again, you've been listening to Life After the Military, which is powered by Pivotal Moments Media. Check us out, subscribe to the show, rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen, rate us. It always helps us out. And make sure to share this with anybody you think would find value. And check out our parent company, pivotalmomentsmedia.com. Check out all the other channels we have. We have a sports focused channel, a women's focused channel, mental fitness building channel. And of course, we have an education center. So we're trying to get that message out there. If you can help us do that, we appreciate it. So for Patty Collins and Howie Cohen, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of Life After the Military. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Cool. Thanks, Patty.
Sure.